US Congress are some of the most successful investors in the world, like Congressman Josh Gottheimer, who amazingly sold Silicon Valley Bank stock the day before the FDIC had to take over the bank. Of course, he also happened to sit on the House Financial Services Committee at the time. Or former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who has famously outperformed the stock market for years. But whether it's inside knowledge or just lucky timing, we now have access to see every trade that they make. So let's take a look at the top trades of the biggest investors in Congress right now. Starting with our first insider, Mark Green, who's traded $96 million worth of stocks this year and made an astounding 122% return in 2023 as reported by Unusual Whales. So Mark Green first made waves during the lockdowns when him and his wife bought shares in General Electric, which was awarded ventilator contracts by the US government while Green was sitting on the House's Special Coronavirus Committee. Plus, GE held contracts with the US military, which again was under the oversight of one of Green's committees. So Green has been extremely busy since my last video covering Congress's trades, but he's still a small fry compared to some of the investors later in this video. So recently, Green has made a name for himself investing in the energy industry, an industry that employs around 7% of his home state of Tennessee, and has contributed around $250,000 to his campaigns over the years, slightly above average for other industries that support him. But what matters to investors? Energy is an area where Green might have some insight given his role as the chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security, with energy independence listed as a key part of ensuring the nation's security. So maybe we can learn something from his trades in this area. Now, to be fair, Green has said before that he believes using insider information for personal benefit is a crime. And he reportedly told his stockbroker to do all his trading for him and just file the reports required by the Stock Act, which was a law that was supposed to stop Congress from insider trading. But Green was then caught violating the Stock Act in 2022 by failing to disclose his trading of NGL Energy, a stock that's up nearly 200% since then. Now, recently Green has been selling a lot of his shares in NGL, but if we look at his most recent buying action for a stock, that would be the 375,000 shares of Carbon Rivers that he's recently purchased, valued between $250,000 and $500,000. Only there's one problem. Carbon Rivers isn't a public company that we can invest in. So let's look at Green's overall largest known stock holding before we move up the list to bigger and bigger traders to a congressman who's traded over $500 million in stocks in just the last year. So even after Green's recent selling of shares, it turns out NGL is still estimated to make up the majority of Green's stock portfolio, which makes sense. The stock has tripled since he first bought it, so he's probably just locking in some gains while letting the rest of his multi-million-dollar position ride. So let's look at what NGL does and try to see why Green owns so much of this stock. So first off, NGL is a tiny company. It's only worth $500 million in total, and they operate in the midstream oil and gas business. So there's kind of three streams in oil and gas. Upstream, where you're searching for and extracting new natural resources. Downstream, where you refine those materials into things like gasoline. And then midstream, which focuses on the transportation and storage of things like oil and water used for extracting oil. But what really matters here is that this is a very heavily regulated industry. We can see on their site that they're calling out how they recently had to partner with the state of New Mexico. So a politician investing heavily here is enough to turn some heads. Now, the company has actually seen decreasing revenue each of their last 4 quarters, but they made almost $550 million this past year alone, basically the whole value of the company. So from my perspective, the company seems pretty risky given their small size, and it's well outside my comfort zone as an investor. But if you like investing in the energy space, it might be worth taking a look at. And by the way, some comments on the last Congress video asked me what the most common stocks were across all of Congress, so I'll be showing that list later in the video. And so is Mark Green investing based on insider knowledge, or is he just selling out now to avoid completely crashing the stock price? Only time will tell for this congressman, but next we have one of the most infamous faces in congressional stock trading buying up some very interesting stocks, Nancy Pelosi. So let's do a quick run through of how Nancy Pelosi and her husband Paul have built a fortune worth an estimated $230 million. Fun fact, Pelosi is the 9th richest person in the House of Representatives. Not bad for a lifelong politician and the son of a pharmacist. Now, I also talked about the Pelosis in my last video covering Congress's trades, and don't worry, we'll be seeing some new faces coming up, but there's just so much to cover in their $137 million worth of trades that we have a bunch of new stocks to talk about. So Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul, does all of their actual trading through a fund that he runs. And I talked before about one famous trade he made when he bought $1 million worth of Tesla options, and the very next month, President Biden signed an executive order to replace the entire federal automobile fleet with electric cars. And later, how they bought options for Broadcom worth $1.6 million off the back of the CHIPS Act. The CHIPS Act was designed to help the US stay competitive in a semiconductor industry increasingly being taken over by Chinese companies. It's an act that Pelosi has been very involved with, but it's also turned some heads with her husband's Broadcom investment. Given how the CHIPS Act funnels funds into US chip makers like Broadcom in the Bay Area, which is where Broadcom is located. The Pelosis also made some massive returns on their big bet on Apple and on Microsoft and Palo Alto Networks, companies that are big in both the cybersecurity and AI space that rely heavily on the latest capabilities of semiconductor chips. And one more crazy stat, the Pelosi's made over a 100% return on Palo Alto Network stock as reported by Unusual Whales, but let's cover the one stock that's made them way more money than even that. So back in 2022, the Pelosi's owned a bunch of shares in the chip maker Nvidia, but they sold those shares to avoid any appearance of conflicts of interest due to Nancy Pelosi's involvement with the CHIPS Act. Then in November 2023, her husband bought $2 million worth of Nvidia options, and less than a month later, the US announced that Nvidia could start selling chips to China as long as they met certain restrictions. And Nvidia stock went up after that. But Pelosi has defended her right to trade stocks, saying this is a free market, and she's certainly been exercising that right. The Pelosi sold just over $2 million worth of Microsoft recently and bought somewhere between $2 million and $10 million in additional Nvidia shares in two separate recent trades. So here's why the Pelosis might be buying more shares in Nvidia, despite the stock already being up over 2,000% in the past 5 years, and their investments from just last November being up over 200% in less than a year. So Nvidia as a stock has looked unstoppable for the last few years. They make the chips required for every new AI service that's being launched, and they own 98% of all revenue from data center AI chips. Their former competitors like AMD and Intel aren't even touching them in this area. But they've also started making major moves into the software market, building frameworks and libraries for other companies to build on top of, as long as they're using Nvidia GPUs, of course. Like Mercedes, self-driving software, or Tesla's huge investments into Nvidia AI chips for their cars. So even though Nvidia's stock price is up around 2,600% over the past 5 years, the company's revenue has also grown around 12x during that time, with their gross profit growing closer to 15x during that period. There's also been an aggressive push to move more chip manufacturing to the US off the back of the Pelosi-supported CHIPS Act, with Intel investing $100 billion to increase domestic chip manufacturing. This has also come with some risk to Nvidia though, with the US considering limiting how many chips companies like Nvidia are allowed to sell to certain countries, like those in the Middle East. And there's also been some other concerning news for Nvidia. Bloomberg recently reported that the US Department of Justice had subpoenaed Nvidia over its dominant AI position under antitrust rules, specifically their acquisition of Run AI for AI workload management. Then later, Nvidia denied that they were ever subpoenaed, but it does appear that the DOJ has started to probe into whether or not Nvidia might be too far onto the antitrust side of things, due to 1, their dominant market position in AI, and 2, how much they try to lock customers into Nvidia GPUs. So some investors think that Nvidia could get fined or their future business might get limited, which caused those investors to discount the stock. But maybe Pelosi thinks those risks are overblown. Now, Nvidia is already pretty well covered in the media, but we'll see some much more under-the-radar stocks from some of these next Congress people, including the top 5 most bought stocks by Congress in the last 60 days. So this next congressman dwarfs Pelosi's trading by nearly double. The Pelosi's traded $137 million worth of stock this past year, but Ro Khanna traded $274 million in that same period. So Khanna is an interesting case in that he's publicly openly advocated for a stock trading ban on Congress, despite himself reportedly trading hundreds of millions of dollars worth of stocks. He actually did a Reddit Ask Me Anything on the topic a couple months ago, and he claimed that he did not own or trade any individual stocks, and that all the trades were assets that his wife had control over. Now, Reddit wasn't super happy with that response, and they criticized the fact that his wife could make those trades at all, seeing as most public companies restrict both insiders and their families from trading. But Congress isn't a public company, so technically it's legal. But at least we can see what trades his wife is making. So all this information I'm looking up on Congress people is public information. They have to publish it. But there's a lot of information that you can find on people that they never wanted to share that's been leaked in data breaches. You may have seen those people search sites where you can see people's personal information from their phone number down to who they live with. And this is because there are data brokers who scrape all the pieces of your data that they can find and sell it to the highest bidder, often without much care for what that bidder is going to do with your data. And the number of victims of data breaches keeps going up every year. The most recent data shows that the number of victims is up 41.5% since 2021. I mean, I don't even answer my phone anymore if it's an unknown number because it's always a scammer. And now with how convincing AI voices are becoming, it's getting kind of scary that either me or someone like my parents could fall for a scammer that's using my personal information from one of those breaches. So that's where this video's sponsor Incogni comes in. Incogni is a service where you give them permission to go out and remove your data from these brokers. See, legally these data brokers have to delete your data if you ask them to, and I actually tried doing that manually before. I spent an afternoon once going through those people search sites to request that they remove my data. I got through maybe 5, but I kept on finding new ones, so I gave up. But with Incogni, they can automatically scan for your data everywhere to remove it, something that would be like a full-time job if you did it yourself. And with a yearly subscription, they will continually monitor these lists to make sure that your data stays private. I've been using them for a bit now, and it's great. When I first signed up, they removed my info from 49 sites immediately and saved me an estimated 36 hours in about 30 seconds. And since then, the number of removals keeps going up on my dashboard. If you use the link in the video description while signing up, Incogni will give you 60% off their annual plan. Just make sure you use the code FinTech to get the discount, or go to incogni.com/fintech. So thank you Incogni for getting my data off those sketchy websites and sponsoring the video. And now let's get to looking at Ro Khanna's latest stock trades. So these are all the Khanna's trades recently, and you can tell they are extremely active traders. All these trades on screen are just from September, but a lot of them are relatively small, between $1,000 and $15,000. And some of this large amount of trading may be because they're trying to stay highly diversified to avoid sector risk and not be overly invested in only a few industries. But there's one stock the Khannas have been absolutely loading up on. Barclays Bank is a British bank based in London that's nearly doubled in value over the past year to a market cap of just shy of $50 billion. So here are the Khannas' purchases of the bank stock dating back to July 2024. You can see they've made 8 purchases ranging between $15,000 to $250,000 per trade. So let's take a quick look at Barclays Bank stock. The stock has an average PE ratio for their industry, but their price to book value and price to tangible book value, which is the value if the company was broken up and sold off for parts, is much lower than usual for a banking stock. It's usually around 1. So the stock may be trading at a bit of a discount at the moment, but this could also be because their earnings are lower than normally you would see for a stock with this many assets. So does Ro Khanna know something else that we don't? Maybe. I mean, these are the committees he sit on, which don't seem to have any special oversight on banking, at least more than Congress has in general. So it seems like he's not quite as entangled in this insider trading mess. But this next congressman is possibly the most controversial stock trader in all of Congress. Josh Gottheimer comes in just above Khanna at $279 million in trades last year, but his profits are off the charts. Another returning member from my last video, Gottheimer has had a very interesting trading history, especially considering his positions on the House Financial Services Committee and as the ranking member of the NSA and Cyber Subcommittee. You know this is going to get good when the NSA starts to pop up in your research. So let's see where Gottheimer gets his reputation as a top congressional trader. A little over 3 years after being appointed to the House Financial Services Committee, which has jurisdiction over issues pertaining to the economy, the banking system, housing, insurance, and security and exchanges, Gottheimer got into hot water when he sold shares in Silicon Valley Bank, a bank that his committee reportedly had jurisdiction over. But the kicker, he sold the stock the day before the FDIC took over the bank. That was a little suspicious timing, but then on top of that, Gottheimer got to question the regulators on why the bank failed. He also has a history for options trading on Microsoft stock. He's buying call options, basically a riskier way to bet on the upside of the stock, despite Microsoft being one of the biggest players in the cybersecurity market and Gottheimer sitting on the cyber subcommittee, whose jurisdiction includes support for the nation's cyber defense and cyber offense. So let's get into his recent trades, but what do you think? Do you mind that Congress can trade stocks like a normal citizen, or do you think it's too much of a conflict of interest? And is there a better way to make the system work where they can trade stocks? Let me know. So Gottheimer's recent trades have been fairly spread out across multiple companies, but his most recent purchase was PayPal, which is interesting for two main reasons. So first off, PayPal is pretty involved with the cybersecurity space. I mean, when you're transferring money online, doing it securely and catching breaches is pretty important to staying in business. And we know Gottheimer has his ear to the ground in this space due to his cyber committee roles, especially given that financial cyber attacks are a focus for countries around the world, since one bad attack could cripple our entire extremely connected financial system. And then of course, PayPal is the poster child for digital banking, which falls under his other committee, the House Financial Services Committee. So overall, PayPal has had a great year as a stock, with the price up 60% to a market cap of over $80 billion. And while the stock's valuation is fairly average for their market at 17, they do throw off a ton of free cash flow. And in a market correction, cash is always king, because more cash means more options. So we can't say for sure if Gottheimer knows more about this stock than us mere mortal investors, but it seems like he could if he really wanted to. But let's move up now to the big leagues. This next congressman dwarfs everyone who's come before by more than double our last trader. People say Congress is more like the 1%. Well, this guy is like the 1% of the 1% here. So Michael McCall tops our list at a staggering $613 million in trading volume. And while we'll get to the top stocks across all of Congress in a second, this guy alone is trading enough to make or break some smaller stocks, and maybe some big ones too. Last year, President Biden signed a bill to force TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, to sell the company or face US restrictions within 12 months. And guess who sponsored that bill other than Mega Millions McCall over here? And earlier this year, McCall started trading heavily in Meta, a company that has a lot to gain from TikTok losing market share in the US. Now, I gotta be clear, I don't necessarily think McCall or these other Congress people are breaking the law or trading on insider information. But I don't know, something feels off when you can own shares in a company and then write legislation that immediately increases the value of those shares overnight. That's all. But let's take a look at McCall's biggest recent trade, and then we'll check on the top 5 most bought stocks across all of Congress. Oh, and a subscribe to the channel would be much appreciated. We're in a race to hit 100,000 subs before the end of the year, and if everyone watching right now subscribed, we could hit it right away. So McCall's wife, Linda, holds most of their assets with a third-party company that executes all their trades. And he has a ton of holdings in the energy space, which kind of makes sense. He's from oil-rich Texas, and he also makes a ton of big trades all the time, including a lot of tech stock trades. But his most recent purchase were 2 separate buys of Aramark, where he put $100,000 to $250,000 into the stock in 2 separate trades on the same day. Aramark provides food and facilities services to big organizations, think schools, hospitals, even prisons. The stock is up around 40% for the year, and they are worth just shy of $10 billion. The stock is on the more expensive side, and they do have some bankruptcy risk from high levels of debt compared to how much cash they have on hand. So here are the committees that McCall sits on, which don't seem to directly tie to Aramark, but McCall isn't the only congressman buying this stock. So let's look at the top 5 stocks being purchased across all of Congress for the last 2 months on the right of your screen. And if you like this video, follow me on Instagram for daily stock posts, and check out the last video on Congress's trades for a few more faces you might recognize. So fun fact, the US Senate has actually way outperformed the House of Representatives in stock investing. Might be something I need to look into next.